Glad to have you back. China will increase tariffs on a total of 5,140 American products. That's from June 1st as the trade war with the U.S. gets out of control, deepening a trade battle and sending financial markets into a tailspin. China announced it would raise tariffs on $60 billion of United States goods. Now, the move comes after the United States hiked tariffs on $200 billion of Chinese products. The retaliatory measures are now announced about an hour after United States President Donald Trump tweeted directly to Chinese President Xi Jinping. The tweet reads, I said openly to President Xi and all of my many friends in China that China will be hurt very badly if you don't make a deal, because companies will be forced to leave China for other countries. Too expensive to buy in China. You had a great deal almost completed and you backed out. When a swift reaction, China's foreign ministry spokesperson Jen Shang says the country will never surrender to external pressures. China is also considering additional actions, including dumping U.S. treasuries, ending U.S. agricultural purchases, and reducing orders for Boeing planes. I have Leonard Ogbaja. He joins me now via Skype from Abuja. He's Executive Director of Center for Trade and Business Environment Advocacy Limited. Many thanks, Leonard, for your time.
Thank you.
I'm going to start this way, Dave. Just 3 days after the United States double tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. Now China is coming up with, they're saying that there will be tariff on $60 billion of U.S. goods effective June 1st. What is happening? What do you make of all of this?
Well, what you're seeing is the classical flexing of political and economic muscle, which is basically how international relation is done. The U.S. is trying to use their economic leverage against China to force China into certain concessions. Maybe I should mention that if you look at the trade, global trade generally is regulated by the World Trade Organization, the various agreements, and the president of the U.S. is of the firm belief that the rules are not in favor of the U.S. as they stand today. I mean, that's ironical because if we go back to who set the rules, it was the U.S. that set the rules in the first place after the depression of the 30s. Now they're saying the rules favor China more, so they want to redefine the rules. Of course, there are proposals at the WTO for reforms, but meanwhile, they've gone ahead to impose unilateral tariff, so there's a legal question there. But beyond the legal question, the economic impact globally is another serious issue. Looking at the global economy, manufacturing is done on a global value chain basis. So that means you can't say specifically that China is exporting to the U.S. finished products, or that the U.S. is exporting to China finished products. They are all mixed. So the basket of products coming from China to the U.S. includes finished products for consumers, but also intermediate products that are used in other manufacturing companies to manufacture. Same thing when you look at it the other way around. In fact, you could say that China imports more of finished products from the U.S. because it's basically aircrafts and aircraft parts, and then automotive vehicle are the two of the highest ranking imports from the U.S. So what you're seeing with this trade war is basically the U.S. trying to twist China into better economic protection, not just, okay, there are two ways. Domestically, the U.S. wants to build its manufacturing capacity, but also internationally, the U.S. is also concerned about how China treats the U.S. companies that operate in China, for example, issues of intellectual property rights and that. So what we're seeing is, to me, is a zero-sum game. The more the tariffs escalate, the two economies will take the hit in different ways, and the global economy will suffer for it at the end of the day. Basically, that's what you're going to see.
Leonard, now, this is an issue of unilateralism and protectionism. That's what many have also said when you talk about this argument. I don't know if you toe that line.
Yes, actually, it's protectionism. Of course, unilateral conducts in that manner, which is really frowned at. Since the inception of the WTO, it is expected that most trade relations between or among countries of the world will be done under the WTO rules, which are robust, even though they require some reform. That's good, but the U.S. has decided to go outside of that setting and take on China unilaterally. Now, what is at stake here is that the U.S. thinks that its economic interest is not being properly protected under the WTO, as it were. There are some merits in that, but there are multiple ways of going around solving that problem. Now, but the route the U.S. has taken right now, like I've said, is problematic. For example, all studies recently have shown that the tariff the U.S. has imposed on Chinese products are effectively paid by U.S. consumers in terms of higher cost of products coming from China, and also effectively paid by U.S. industries that rely on input from China. Now, of course, it's going to cost. I mean, the first quarter, I realized there's been a 9% drop of Chinese exports to the U.S. for the first time, actually. Before that, it was a 7% increase in the last quarter of last year. Now there's a 9% decrease. So it's beginning to have effect on China. But also don't forget that the Chinese economy is deeply resilient in terms of domestic consumption and increasing wealth. So they will be able to absorb some of that. Now, on the part of the U.S., what you're going to see is that there will be likelihood of certain manufacturing industries or sectors rising up. Now, but that is speculative, whether it is going to happen. But the government seems to have devised an effective means of using the tariffs to compensate the industries that are going to suffer loss as a result of this tariff increase. So looking at it on the long run, the jury is yet out on how it is going to go.
Leonard, I want to throw it this way. U.S.-China trade tariff gave global markets a blow, a big blow, turning a bloody nose. That's talking about trading on the exchange. It's been looking, even Tuesday, still looking red. How long are we going to see the market bleeding this much?
Well, of course, the markets will bleed, and they'll stabilize at some point. But it's important to look at the factors that are affecting the market globally, really, because I've talked about the issue of global value chain. So it means, in one way or the other, companies around the world rely on different countries for their production and for their business. So, for example, look at a company like Apple, does most of its productions in China. And you realize that the increase in tariff is going to affect the bottom line. Exactly, it's going to reduce the profit they are going to take. Another one like Qualcomm that is into semiconductors, China is also a major market for them. So it's either most of these companies, it's either they are producing in China, or China is their major market, or they are producing in the US, or the US is their major market. So once you see signals of things that could increase their cost of production, basically the markets will react immediately to it. But we're also expecting that the negotiations between the US and Chinese authorities are going to continue. And if they're able to find a common ground very soon, the market would also begin to stabilize. But right now, there's going to be a lot of panic, and I don't foresee a 1 week or so solution to that. I think the markets will still be in a panic mood, maybe for the next 1 or 2 weeks, until a definite direction comes forward. And that definite direction would depend on how China treats the issue of coming back to the negotiation table, and whether they're able to, whether they are willing to accept what has been agreed or not.
Leonard, before I let you go, let's bring it down now to the consumers. Beef, lamb, pork products, a variety of vegetables, fruit juice, cooking oil, tea, coffee are part of these items that are going to be affected by these tariff hikes. How do you see consumers making a way around all of this?
Yeah, what you're going to see is increase in consumer price. That's definite, because at the end of the day, the cost of tariff is effectively passed to the consumers. Now, but what you're also going to see, interesting thing that is happening by the side, is that alternative suppliers to the U.S. market are also emerging. For example, for the agri products, you can see countries like Brazil or India. For garments, you see Vietnam, Malaysia coming in to fill this gap. But you also realize that it will take time for the value chain to readjust. For example, for these countries to start producing at the scale they were not used to before. So basically, yes, consumers will suffer. Manufacturers in other countries, in other third-party countries, would gain on the short run, maybe on the long run. But it's also important to look at, for example, countries like Nigeria and other African countries. Where do we even stand in all this? You realize that China is a major consumer of primary products, energy products, whether fuel, whether coal, and all that from African countries. And if the Chinese economy slows down, it also means that their consumption of these energy products or primary products would go down. Yeah, you know. So it also means that we are going to suffer in one way or the other. For example, Nigeria ought to be a major supplier of sorghum to China, which China used to buy from the US, you know, but we don't even have that capacity. Soya beans is another area. Now, the Chinese market is being supplied by Brazil and Argentina when this trade war started with the US, you know. No, so what it simply means is that countries that are prepared are taking advantage of this trade war, but we are not even prepared to take advantage of it in any way. So that's why on the long run, we must learn how to build resilience in our economy and make sure that we're always in a good position to take advantage of issues like this. I mean, the other greater implications as to our position on the WTO reforms, which is a very a topical issue right now at the WTO. For example, the US is standing on the dispute settlement, refusing the appointment of judges. So that means right now you can't even, maybe in the next 1 year, the dispute settlement body would not have enough quorum to settle this kind of trade dispute. So it's basically.
All right, Leonard Dogbaja, thank you very much. I know you can go on and on. I thank you so much for your contribution. He's the Executive Director, Center for Trade and Business Environment Advocacy Limited. You see that passion there, talking about how this trade war will affect countries like Nigeria and talking about even the African continent in its